The boardroom at Meridian Aerospace looked more like a war council than a meeting space. A 20-foot glass table gleamed under recessed lighting, flanked by black leather chairs occupied by executives in tailored suits. On the far wall, a massive screen displayed schematics of the company's crown jewel, a sleek, silver prototype jet engine worth more than most small towns. It was the last place anyone expected to see Marcus Miller, 17 years old, hair slightly unkempt, wearing boots 2 sizes too big, his father's, and a flannel shirt faded from years of washing. He stood in the doorway as though he'd accidentally wandered into the wrong universe. The room stilled for a fraction of a second. Then came the laughter. It started as a few chuckles from the lower end of the table and grew into a chorus of snickers and smirks. These were people who closed 8-figure contracts before lunch. They did not take interruptions well, especially from the janitor's kid. At the head of the table, Victoria Sterling rose like a commander addressing her troops. Her silver hair was pulled into a bun, so tight it looked like it might cut glass. She had the kind of voice that could stop conversations mid-sentence, and she'd used it for 2 decades to build Meridian from a backroom supplier into a billion-dollar defense contractor. "Marcus Miller," she said slowly, as if tasting the syllables. "I'm told you want to fix something for us." The laughter returned, this time tinged with disbelief. Marcus kept his hands loosely behind his back. "The engine. I'd like to take a look at it." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Victoria leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. "Let me make sure I understand. My team of engineers," she gestured toward a group of men and women whose resumes included MIT, Caltech, and NASA, "have spent 3 weeks failing to identify the problem. And you believe you can succeed where they haven't." "I believe I can find the problem," Marcus said evenly. She studied him the way a predator sizes up prey, not out of fear, but curiosity about how long the chase might last. The other board members shifted forward in their seats, sensing sport. "And what exactly," Victoria said, "makes you think you have something to contribute here? Do you even know what a turbine stage is?" "Yes," Marcus said. It was not defiance, not arrogance, just an unshaken certainty that made a few people glance at each other. Daniel Miller, Marcus's father, was mopping floors 2 levels below. He'd been working the overnight cafeteria shift for nearly a decade. Marcus had been waiting for him to finish when he'd heard raised voices through the thick oak boardroom doors. He understood the technical terms being thrown around because he'd grown up with them, from diagrams spread across the kitchen table, from late-night lessons in thermodynamics, from the man who had taught him how to hold a wrench before he could read. Victoria straightened. "Here's what we'll do." Her smile was razor-thin. "You fix the engine, our $8 million engine, and I'll personally write you a recommendation to any engineering school you choose." But she let the pause linger like the edge of a cliff. "When you fail, you and your father are both out of here. Permanently. And you'll never set foot in this building again." A murmur ran through the room. Marcus didn't flinch. "All right," he said. The response seemed to irritate her. She'd expected him to stammer, to retreat. Instead, he stood there calm as stone. "When would you like me to start?" he asked. Her eyes narrowed a fraction. "Right now," she said. "The board will accompany us. We'll film the entire thing. I want there to be no doubt what happens when overconfidence meets reality." The executives rose, gathering their tablets and coffee cups as though preparing for a field trip. A few smiled like they were headed to a live performance they'd been promised would end in disaster. Marcus followed them out of the boardroom, his boots making soft, deliberate thuds on the polished marble floor. He knew exactly what they were expecting, a train wreck. And in a way, they'd get one. Just not the one they'd been promised. As the elevator doors closed, Victoria glanced at him in the mirrored surface. "Enjoy your last 10 minutes in this building, Mr. Miller." Marcus didn't answer. He was already thinking about the tools he would need. The elevator doors slid open to reveal the cavernous heart of Meridian Aerospace, Hangar C. The place had the hush of a cathedral, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows, its air heavy with the scent of machine oil and ozone. Under blinding industrial lights sat the centerpiece, a prototype jet engine nearly 8 feet tall, a metallic sculpture of titanium, steel, and ambition. Every curve spoke of speed and power. Every gleam on its polished surface screamed money. $8 million of it. Clustered around the engine were 24 engineers in white lab coats, their faces lined with exhaustion from 3 weeks of fruitless work. Oscilloscopes, laptops, and diagnostic rigs surrounded the engine like a forest of blinking lights and tangled cables. Coffee cups and energy drink cans littered workbenches, silent witnesses to the all-nighters that had led nowhere. Victoria Sterling's heels clicked sharply against the concrete as she entered, the board trailing her in a semicircle of tailored arrogance. She didn't just walk into the hangar. She claimed it, her posture saying this was her domain, her creation, her power. Marcus followed at a measured pace, hands still clasped behind his back. The space swallowed him whole, but his eyes roamed the engine with quiet hunger. The lead engineer, Dr. Zara Mitchell, glanced up from a cluster of monitors. Her sharp features softened only slightly when she saw Victoria. "Still nothing," she said, her voice flat. "Fault shows up without pattern. All systems check out on diagnostics." "That," Victoria said, turning toward Marcus, "is what you're here to fix. Impress us." The engineers began whispering to each other, some curious, some openly amused. "The janitor's kid? Really?" Marcus walked slowly around the engine, ignoring the murmurs. He crouched at the intake assembly, studying the alignment of the fan blades. Moved to the combustion chamber housing, tracing the wiring of the sensors with his eyes. He didn't speak, didn't explain himself, just kept looking. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of equipment and the faint tapping of someone's pen. The board members exchanged impatient glances. Finally, Marcus walked to Dr. Mitchell's workstation, scanning the data across 3 monitors. "Has anyone checked harmonic resonance in the third-stage compressor?" he asked. Mitchell blinked, then let out a short laugh. "Of course. We've run every diagnostic in the manual, and a few we invented for this unit. Resonance is within acceptable parameters." She pointed to a wall-mounted display filled with waveforms and frequency plots. To most eyes, it was abstract art. To Marcus, it was a language. He nodded, not arguing. "Can I see the assembly maintenance logs?" That earned him a few raised eyebrows. Most people didn't even know those logs existed. Mitchell hesitated, then slid a thick binder across the workbench. "Knock yourself out." Marcus flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. Pages of check marks, signatures, and torque specifications. Quality control stamps from different shifts. Then he stopped. His eyes stayed fixed on one page for a few seconds too long. He closed the binder with quiet finality and turned toward the engine again. "I think I know where the problem is," he said. Victoria's voice sliced through the moment. "Enough theatrics. Either fix it or stop wasting our time." The executives nodded in agreement, eager for their anticipated punchline. Marcus stepped to the starboard side of the engine, stopping at a panel covering the fuel injection system. "I'll need a 7/16 wrench," he said. Then, after a pause, "And I have a question for you, Miss Sterling." Victoria tilted her head. "Make it quick. Do you remember Thomas Miller?" It was like someone had yanked the power from the entire hangar. For a flicker of a second, her expression broke. The steel in her gaze wavered, replaced by something tighter, recognition and fear. The board members glanced at each other. The engineers stayed very still. "I don't know who you're talking about," Victoria said at last, her tone too controlled. Marcus accepted the wrench from a nearby tool cart and began loosening the access panel with steady, practiced movements. "Thomas Miller was my father's name. Before he changed it to Daniel. Before he had to mop your floors to support his family." The wrench made a sharp metallic click. "He designed this engine," Marcus continued, "the original prototype. Before Meridian bought it. Before you modified it." A low ripple passed through the engineers. Mitchell stopped pretending to type. Marcus kept working, unseating the panel to reveal the dense network of fuel lines and regulators. His hands moved like someone who'd done this many times before. He told me that if the engine ever had intermittent shutdowns, the first place to look was fuel injection timing. Because the tolerances were so tight, even a minor installation error could cascade into failure. Victoria's jaw tightened. Marcus didn't look up. He also told me corporate would probably try to cut costs by using cheaper parts that look identical but aren't. Another click. The panel came free. Marcus reached inside and extracted a precision-machined regulator the size of a fist. To the untrained eye, he said, holding it up, this looks perfect. But it's installed backwards. That creates a 3-millisecond delay in fuel injection timing. Small enough to evade fault detection, but under certain loads, it kills the engine. He handed it to Dr. Mitchell, who examined it under a magnifier. Her eyebrows rose in slow, reluctant confirmation. The hangar stayed silent except for the faint, steady sound of Marcus beginning to put the part back, this time in the correct orientation. And for the first time since they'd left the boardroom, Victoria Sterling said nothing. Marcus tightened the last bolt on the fuel regulator with a precise, practiced motion. No wasted movement. No hesitation. Just the rhythm of someone who'd done this countless times before, not in a billion-dollar hangar, but at a kitchen table littered with coffee mugs and hand-drawn schematics. He closed the access panel with a muted clang, then turned to Dr. Zara Mitchell. Fired up. The lead engineer hesitated, glancing at Victoria Sterling as though seeking permission. Victoria didn't speak, but her tight, pale expression said enough. Mitchell reached for the console and pressed the ignition sequence. The hangar filled with the deep, steady whine of a starter. A moment later, the prototype engine roared to life. It was different this time. Gone was the sputtering, the sudden drops in RPM, the hesitant surges of unstable combustion. Instead, the machine settled into a smooth, balanced hum, a controlled symphony of power. The diagnostic screens lit up with green indicators across every system. Fuel flow, pressure ratios, turbine temperature, all in optimal range. 3 weeks of red error codes had just vanished in the time it took Marcus to fix a backwards part. The engineers stared at their instruments as if they'd just witnessed a resurrection. One leaned closer to the display, scrolling through the data twice, then 3 times. Another whispered, "It's perfect." Mitchell finally looked up, her voice quieter than usual. "What you described, it wasn't in any of our protocols. We never even thought to check that installation orientation." Marcus simply shrugged. "My father told me to always check the fuel injection timing on this design first. It's the most sensitive point in the system." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Victoria's eyes flashed at the mention of his father again, but this time there was no hiding the recognition. The engineers noticed. The board members noticed. And in that shared glance, Marcus knew the shift had begun, their curiosity now aimed at her, not him. One of the senior engineers, an older man with a beard the color of steel shavings, cleared his throat. "Wait. Did you say your father designed the original prototype?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Before Meridian bought it." "Before you," he glanced at Victoria. "Modified it." A ripple of unease moved through the group. Conversations that had been muted now began in low voices, darting between technical marvel and personal betrayal. Mitchell broke the silence. "If that's true, then his name should be on the original patent filings." Marcus nodded. "It is. Or was. Until certain paperwork changes." The engine continued to purr in the background, its stability an unspoken endorsement of his claim. Victoria finally found her voice, though it lacked the bite it had carried upstairs. "That's a bold accusation, Mr. Miller, and I hope you understand the seriousness of making such claims without proof." "I do," Marcus said calmly. "I also understand the seriousness of billing the government for research you've already been paid for. My father did too, before you made sure he could never work in this field again." The words landed like a blade across the room's composure. The board members, moments ago expecting a public embarrassment, now stood in the middle of something far more dangerous. The casual entertainment had turned into a potentially career-ending scandal. Mitchell crossed her arms, looking from Marcus to Victoria. If his father really was Thomas Miller, then he was, Marcus interrupted, until he changed his name to Daniel to avoid the stain you put on it. Victoria took a slow breath, but it sounded shaky in the quiet. Enough. This is just the beginning, Marcus finished for her. The older engineer with the beard stepped forward, peering at the regulator Marcus had corrected. You just solved a problem that's had us grounded for 3 weeks, he said. And you did it in under an hour. That doesn't happen by luck. Marcus didn't answer. The engine was still running perfectly, its sound filling the space like a victory drumbeat. From the far end of the hangar, a young technician jogged in, carrying a phone. Dr. Mitchell, he said, panting. People are already talking about it upstairs. Word spreading. Mitchell didn't look away from Marcus. Yeah, she murmured. I imagine it is. Around them, the board members were no longer smirking. Some whispered urgently to each other. Others just kept glancing at Victoria, as if waiting for her to regain control of the moment. She didn't. Marcus wiped his hands on his flannel, then stepped back from the engine. It'll keep running now, he said. You might want to order new regulators, the right ones this time. Nobody laughed. By the time the engine spun down and the hangar fell quiet, the story had already slipped its leash. Technicians who'd watched the fix told colleagues. Colleagues texted friends. Someone from procurement posted a cryptic message in an internal Slack channel about a kid and a regulator. Within an hour, the rumor had a spine. The janitor's son had solved what Meridian's finest couldn't. By mid-afternoon, it had grown a second spine. He knew where to look because his father had designed the prototype years ago. Victoria Sterling moved fast. She always did. The moment the board retreated to the elevator, she barked orders like a commander under artillery fire. Legal would convene in Conference B. Comms would prepare a statement about a collaborative engineering breakthrough. HR would circulate a reminder about confidentiality clauses. Security would quietly collect visitor badges from non-essential personnel, which was a polite way of saying the cafeteria worker and his overconfident kid. In the glass-walled conference room, she stood at the head of the table and rebuilt her voice into steel. We've had a successful test, she announced, as if the success had sprouted from her own hand. I want language drafted immediately. Celebrate the team. No individuals named. A junior comms manager raised a timid hand. There are already videos, ma'am. Phone footage from the hangar. He asked for a 7/16 and fixed it in 10 minutes. People are calling him Wrench Kid. It's trending. Then we'll correct the narrative, Victoria said, flat. And we'll do it before anyone else does. But the narrative had other plans. Downstairs, Dr. Zara Mitchell ignored the email calling her to Conference B. She stood with 2 engineers and a QA auditor at the workstation, scrolling back through assembly logs and torque records. The regulator that Marcus had flipped to its correct orientation turned a key in her memory. A procurement freeze 2 months ago, a substitute component cleared temporarily, a supplier she'd argued against using. Pull the purchase orders, she told the auditor. All of them. Not the sanitized summaries. I want the line items. They pulled them. Over and over. The same vendor popped like a bad tooth. The price looked right. The part numbers looked almost right. The tolerances were not. Mitchell leaned back, the fluorescent light carving shadows under her eyes. We didn't miss the failure, she said quietly. We were told to ignore the path to it. The auditor glanced at her. You're saying? I'm saying the wrong parts were approved to meet a margin target. And someone up the chain signed off. She didn't say the name. She didn't need to. 2 floors up, a different narrative clicked into place. A facilities supervisor found Daniel Miller in a hallway, hands still damp from a mop bucket, and asked him to surrender his badge. The man didn't look like a threat to anyone. Stooped shoulders, tired eyes, a stiffness in his walk earned from too many nights pushing carts. But today he straightened. Is my son still in the building? Daniel asked. The supervisor hesitated, then lowered his voice. He's with the engineers. They're not letting him out of their sight. Daniel nodded once and handed over the badge. Then he's safe. He started toward the stairwell anyway. The board reconvened with legal counsel while the hangar hummed with quiet revolt. Engineers who had spent careers learning how not to make noise were suddenly stubbornly loud in the ways that mattered. Saving screenshots, downloading copies of logs to personal drives, snapping photos of the reoriented regulator. There's a particular look that enters a room when the people who actually know how things work decide to stop protecting the people who don't. It isn't mutiny. It's gravity reasserting itself. Dr. Mitchell, a security officer, said when she finally looked up, "Ms. Sterling wants you upstairs." "She can want," Mitchell replied, not unkindly. "I'll be filing a corrective action report and a safety incident write-up. They both go to the same government mailbox." "Doctor, if you'd like to escort me," she added, closing the binder of purchase orders, "we can walk to my desk together." They walked. On the mezzanine, two accountants peered over a monitor, whispering like kids with a flashlight under a blanket. They'd found something ugly. Duplicate billing codes layered like sediment across a decade of contracts, research dollars invoiced twice with different write-ups, milestones met on paper by recycling old deliverables with new titles. It looked almost clever if you didn't know what you were looking at. They knew. One of them called the company's ethics hotline and left a message he never expected anyone to return. Someone did. An outside law firm retained by the board, not Victoria. The ground shifted again. By late afternoon, comms hit send on a press release congratulating Meridian's innovative team culture and multidisciplinary problem-solving. It went up on the website with a photo of the engine alone, gleaming and personality-free. No kid. No wrench. No story. The internet shrugged and posted the videos anyway. In one clip, you could hear Marcus say 7/16 and someone off-camera laugh, certain a punchline was coming. In another, you saw Dr. Mitchell's face as she examined the regulator under a magnifier and went very still. The views climbed like a rocket launch. A local tech reporter tweeted, "Meridian's $8 million engine fixed by janitor's son." If true, this is the story of the year. A national outlet followed. Sources claim internal dispute over design ownership at Meridian Aerospace. In Conference B, the glass walls might as well have been aquarium panes. People walked past, slowed, stared. Inside, Victoria's jaw kept getting tighter. She called comms back in. "Get me ahead of this," she said. "I want an interview tonight." Legal slid a folder across the table. "We have a different problem," counsel said carefully. "If Thomas Miller is Daniel Miller, if he has prior designs on file that match our prototypes, and if the procurement substitution led to a safety-critical failure, the company will need to self-report immediately." Victoria didn't look at the folder. "No. Refusing to self-report will be discoverable," legal said. "And the penalties." "Find a narrative that protects the company," she said. "That's your job." Legal leaned back, expression unreadable. "Protecting the company may involve protecting it from you." Silence fell like a dropped wrench. At 6:12 p.m., the lobby doors hissed open and a small procession entered. 2 auditors from the Defense Contract Management Agency, 3 agents with credentials in slim leather cases, and a polite woman in a navy blazer who introduced herself as lead investigator. They were there to preserve records and secure materials relevant to active and historical contracts. The receptionist tried to smile and said she needed to call upstairs. The woman in the blazer nodded, already looking toward the elevators. "Please do," she said. "We'll start in procurement." By 6:30, IT had been handed preservation letters and instructions to mirror servers. Hard drives clicked into forensic cradles with an almost gentle sound. Backups were imaged. Email accounts were frozen. Someone in legal, palms damp, forwarded the auditors the same purchase orders Dr. Mitchell had been reading an hour earlier. Funny how paper moves faster when it's headed downhill. Security found Victoria in her office, staring at a blank television screen that reflected her like an oil slick. "There are federal agents here," the chief said. "They're requesting cooperation." She smoothed her jacket. "Then let's cooperate." But cooperation meant opening drawers she had kept locked for years. It meant watching other hands lift folders labeled with project names she'd christened herself, peel back the slick pages and say, "We'll be taking these." It meant the slow, dawning understanding that a machine she believed she controlled had been quietly switched to a different pilot. She tried charm first, the humane, reasonable CEO eager to assist. It worked on people unused to the job. It did not work on the woman in the navy blazer, who replied with the gentle patience of someone who knows her authority does not require volume. "We'll need your phone," the woman said. "And your laptop." Victoria hesitated a fraction too long. The woman waited. The gap between them filled with the soft tick of a wall clock and the distant hum of servers being mirrored. Finally, Victoria handed them over. In the hangar, Marcus sat on a rolling stool next to the sleeping engine, an island of calm in a tide he had not intended to unleash. He hadn't come to ruin anyone. He'd come to fix a thing that deserved to work. But the line between those actions was thinner than he'd imagined. Daniel found him there and stood for a long moment, taking in the size of it all, the engine, the building, the day. When he spoke, his voice carried sandpaper and sunlight. "You didn't break anything," he said. "You told the truth out loud, and the lies broke themselves." Marcus looked up at his father's face, older than it should have been, and felt something settle in his chest. Not triumph. Not relief. Alignment. Zara Mitchell joined them, holding a tablet loaded with photos of the corrected assembly. "They're going to ask me what happened," she said. "I'm going to tell them." Daniel nodded. "Tell them everything." She glanced toward the elevator bank. "You should know agents are here. They're imaging records. It's moving fast." "It always does," Daniel said softly. "Once it starts." Mitchell studied him. "Why didn't you fight back sooner?" "I did," he said. "Just not in rooms anyone believed in. Took me too long to realize the room wasn't the point. Night came down in the way it does on industrial campuses. Slow, sodium orange, indifferent. The press gathered across the street like a flock of dark birds. Employees drifted out in clumps, murmuring, casting looks back at the building as though it might confess something if they stared hard enough. In the executive wing, the woman in the navy blazer completed a final circuit with 2 agents and a cart stacked with bankers' boxes and sealed evidence bags. "Miss Sterling," she said, pausing at the doorway to Victoria's office, "we have a warrant authorizing us to take you into custody for questioning." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even dramatic. It was professional, inevitable, delivered with a clean, dull click of a seatbelt fastening. Victoria's hand went to her throat, then dropped. For a heartbeat, the posture returned, the bearing, the command, the persona that had intimidated rooms into silence for 20 years. Then it slipped. Just a fraction. Enough to show the person underneath. Tired, cornered, human. She didn't fight. She didn't beg. She stood, allowed the cuffs, smoothed her jacket with her bound hands as though straightening a wrinkle she could still control, and walked. The corridor outside had a few witnesses. An intern who would never forget this hallway, a security guard who'd once told his mother he worked at the safest place in the city, and Dr. Zara Mitchell, who stood very still and did not look away. News vans caught the tail end. Lights, the hint of silver hair, a face that had lived on magazine covers climbing into a government sedan. Cameras flashed like thunderstorms. Reporters called her name and got nothing in return. On the mezzanine, Marcus and Daniel watched from behind the glass. No cheer rose from them. No fist. Just a long, quiet exhale neither of them knew they'd been holding for 15 years. "Tomorrow," Daniel said, "we'll wake up and there will be more work. Papers to file. People to tell. They will call it justice. It won't feel neat. It never does." Marcus nodded. "But it'll be true." He lifted his gaze to the engine. Even in the half-light, it looked poised, like a runner waiting for the crack of a starting pistol. It had been built for force and speed, but right now it taught a different lesson. Precision is a kind of honesty. Outside, sirens dwindled. Inside, hard drives kept humming and printers spit out chain of custody sheets. Somewhere in the middle floors, an ethics hotline voicemail was being transcribed into an email with 12 recipients and the word urgent in the subject line. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It rarely does. It happened the way buildings fail. Hairline fractures, spreading through places no one thinks to check until the windows don't close right and the doors start to stick, And one day the roof is simply closer to your head than it used to be. By the time the clock in the lobby hit 10 p.m., Meridian Aerospace was still standing. On paper, it would stand for months, maybe years. But the load-bearing lie had been removed, and everyone who understood structures knew what that meant. Marcus reached into his flannel pocket and found the small, grease-smudged notebook he carried everywhere, a hand-me-down of sketches, equations, and coffee rings. He rubbed the edge of a page with his thumb, feeling the ridge where his father's pencil had pressed hard and certain. "Ready?" Daniel asked. Marcus slipped the notebook back and rose. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go home." Behind them, the engine sat flawless and quiet, a machine that did exactly what it had been designed to do when every piece pointed the right way. Tomorrow it would wake the building with its clean, even roar. Tonight it waited, like the truth, patient and undeniable. The story didn't fade. Meridian Aerospace made the morning news for weeks, first as a curiosity. Teenager fixes $8 million jet engine. And then as a scandal that unraveled thread by thread until the whole suit lay in pieces on the floor. By the time the federal charges against Victoria Sterling were read aloud in court, everyone from aviation bloggers to defense analysts knew the name Marcus Miller. And just as importantly, they were remembering the name Thomas Miller. For Marcus, the attention was a strange kind of turbulence. He wasn't used to strangers recognizing him in coffee shops or professors leaning forward just a little more when he spoke in class. Scholarship offers piled up in his inbox from every corner of the country. MIT, Stanford, Caltech. Letters that would have felt impossible 6 months ago now arrived with the routine dull thump of the mail slot. But he didn't go anywhere. The University of Washington was only a bus ride from home. He could see his father every week. More importantly, he could see the hangar. The engine still sat there, not as Meridian's triumph, but as an unspoken monument to what had happened. Whenever he visited, the engineers who'd once laughed at him now waved him over, eager to talk shop. Daniel didn't return to the cafeteria. The Pentagon awarded him his first private consulting contract within months, a project developing a next-generation propulsion system. It wasn't a mercy hire. The engineers at Defense had remembered his name from old patent archives and wanted his mind back in the room. This time, it was on his terms. His home office became a laboratory again, a drafting table under a window, whiteboards on 2 walls, and a workbench that smelled faintly of metal shavings. Marcus would drop by after class to find him hunched over a schematic, muttering about pressure ratios or blade geometry, just as he had when Marcus was a boy. And always on the corner of that table lay the notebook. It was leather-bound, its spine worn soft from years of use, the edges of its pages curled from being flipped through again and again. Inside were 15 years of designs and ideas Daniel had carried in his head while pushing mop buckets down Meridian's corridors. Not just turbine concepts, but whole families of innovations that had never left the paper. One evening, Marcus ran his hand over the cover. "You kept all of it," he said. Daniel didn't look up from his work. "What else was I going to do? Throw it away?" Marcus smiled. Some people would have. His father set down his pencil and met his eyes. "That's the difference between people who make things and people who sell them, son. Makers don't stop just because no one's buying." Victoria Sterling's trial began the following spring. Marcus didn't go, but he read about it. The fraud, the duplicate billings, the falsified dismissal of his father, all laid out in exhibits and sworn testimony. She didn't get the decades in prison some had predicted, but her career was over, her wealth scattered in settlements and legal fees. When reporters asked Marcus how he felt about her downfall, he said the same thing every time. "I didn't take anything from her. I just put something back where it belonged." It was the closest he ever came to victory laps. The first day of classes at UW felt almost anticlimactic. Marcus carried the same worn backpack he'd had in high school. In its front pocket, wrapped in a cloth, was the notebook. Not for luck, for reference. There were equations in there that his professors wouldn't teach for another year. He found a seat in a lecture hall filled with strangers and opened to a page halfway through. His father's handwriting marched in steady lines of numbers and annotations. Beside them, small sketches of fan blades curled into tight spirals, their proportions exact. A few rows up, a student leaned over to whisper to her friend. "Is that the wrench kid?" Marcus heard it, but kept his eyes on the page. Fame was noise, work was signal. One Saturday, months later, he and Daniel returned to the hangar. The security guard at the gate didn't even ask for ID. Inside, the prototype stood exactly as he remembered, polished, still waiting. Zara Mitchell joined them, wiping her hands on a rag. "Still running like a dream," she said. "We made the part change permanent. No more shortcuts." Daniel walked up to the engine and rested a hand on the cowling. "Treat her right, and she'll outlive all of us," he murmured. Mitchell grinned. "Funny thing is, the younger techs here now, they've never even heard the old story. To them, this is just the engine that works." Marcus thought about that. About how stories fade while machines keep running if they're built right. As they left the hangar, he glanced back one last time. In the highlight, the engine's polished surfaces threw off a faint reflection, a distorted image of himself, boots scuffed, flannel sleeves rolled, walking beside his father. The legacy wasn't the fix. It wasn't even the exposure of fraud. It was the proof, written in steel and motion, that truth had a way of finding its way back into the open, sometimes through a courtroom, sometimes through a well-aimed wrench. And maybe, he thought, through the hands of the next kid who refused to believe he didn't belong in the room.